Three, two, one. Welcome to Crossing Face. I'm John Pinna, and today we have an Episcopalian pastor on to speak to us. Pastor Yoo, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We were we were spending too much time talking about nonsense before the recording. And I said we just got to record, but if you have two belts behind you, two WW. Well, I guess I don't know. It's WWE now. It's not WWF.
It's WWE. Yeah, they lost to the Panda. They lost the rights to WWF, the worldwide foundation of animals, or something like that.
Still difficult to even say for me, And so I committed a hate crime earlier because you're an elder millennial. I said we're the same age. I'm a 50. And you're like, whoa.
Let me enjoy my. I'm not even like halfway done with 40 yet. Let me enjoy the rest. I have 6 years of my 40s left. Let me enjoy being 40.
Like I don't get a commission if you agree with me. There's no, it's just really funny. So, but your favorite wrestler is Sting, just for the record, and your
all time,
and then your legacy guy is Hulk Hogan.
Was Macho Man. I mean, like I was telling you, Hulk Hogan brought me into wrestling. I grew up a huge. I mean, like I remember at 12 years old, I wrote a letter to Hulk Hogan because I thought he was really injured. But growing up, he was on vacations. So they had to write him off the show. But after a while, we just got to see what kind of human being Hulk Hogan is, and I'm just like, no, I can't have that person be. And maybe a blessing. I hate to say this. I can't believe I'm gonna say this, but maybe like Macho Man died pretty early.
Yeah.
And maybe, we didn't get to see how much of a damaged person he was because he died so early. Because these wrestlers from the 90s and 80s, they carry a lot of trauma and a lot of like drug abuse because there's no regulation. So a lot of them end up just not being healthy people. And so maybe Macho Man, that's saying from Dark Knight, you either die a villain or you die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become a villain.
Sure.
Maybe bless his rest his soul. Maybe he died early before we got to see the real human side of Macho Man.
Well, I think that he went through a crucible. If you've seen on Netflix McMahon, did you see the documentary?
No, I haven't seen that yet. Surprisingly,
it's tough. It's tough to watch. Macho Man. He was in his personal life the way he was in the ring. Like,
yes,
that was his whole thing. Is like he had the voice and all that business. And then towards the latter part of his life, he kind of got out of that. He broke from his character and sort of became like who he was prior to, and was able to enjoy a few years with his high school sweetheart, actually, which is pretty cool.
Right. That's right.
Which is pretty neat. But yeah. So I like I said, I did hold a sign up at a local WWF function saying Bundy's undies. So I did do that. So
or King Kong Bundy.
Yeah, King Kong Bundy. And I guess I was against him. I have no idea. I have no idea. It was like there was some big, it's completely arbitrary. It's like sports events. People are talking about we were talking about the Super Bowl, and I said, I just be honest with you, I was shocked that Seattle had a team, and they go, and they were like, what are you talking about? I go, as a New Yorker, everybody else are just the enemy. It just doesn't, we get the Yankees, we get this, we get that. We know the Cowboys because the Cowboys are, we've had a long-standing rivalry with the Cowboys for some reason.
Same division.
Yeah, and they get, they deserve everything they get. But we have, of course, the Giants is going through a time of troubles right now. But and if you're a Mets or Jets fan, you really shouldn't even mention that. I mean, I think Trump should start with deportations, he should start with them. But that's just me speaking as a New Yorker. I'm not speaking as an ambassador of New York State. But in any event, yeah, you had these two belts behind you, and so we were chatting about that a little bit before. But I think it's here's a question. So you're an Episcopalian pastor. Faith.
Yeah.
Is it? Well, and your father was a pastor. You come from a legacy of pastoral, sort of pastoral
lineage.
History. Yeah, lineage. And so, is wrestling? Is WW? Is wrestling a religion?
It's a cult for sure.
So So you say that because you have like McMahon, was
Well,
in
no,
charge.
because there's levels of I can't believe we're opening with this. This is awesome. There's level of fandom, right? You have the fandom where as a kid, what you see you perceive as reality, right?
Right.
Like you don't understand. Like you're still into Santa. You still like you see these guys and you just think they're superheroes because they're big and the way they're portrayed. And then you either grow out of it because you realize that this is all scripted. And I want to make sure that people know that wrestling is not fake. It's scripted because there's a difference. Um, and
You're still
then
like, see, we're two people that were born into this faith, and now we still are apologists for it. Like like this, you're saying. I just want to let you guys know
right.
it's real. It's
So then,
scripted.
so
Real.
then, so then there's a so you either grow out of it or you go into the next level of fandom, and that's when you start getting obsessed with the production of it all. They call it like the background, like the locker room drama, the way that the people are pushed or buried or and all that stuff. And there's a different layer of fandom. So while you're watching the product, you also enjoying how the product was set up. There's a lot of times there's this two terms. One's called a work and one's called a shoot. And the work is part of the script. People follow it. And then every once in a while, something will happen where you sit back and wonder, was that a shoot? Which means that it was unscripted, it was actually real, or was that part of it? And then to make it all confusing, sometimes what they have is called a work shoot, where you make it look like it was unintentionally that was intentionally off script, but it was written that way. So once you get to that level, it's like going to seminary, right? You study the Bible academically, and you start realizing that some of the stories that you grew up with at Sunday school doesn't carry through. And for instance, the story of Jonah. All my life, I was told Jonah was swallowed by a man, by a fish, and we believe that to the T. Like it actually happened. But the first thing that my Hebrew Bible professor said to me in seminary, to our class, first day of class, he said, "If you believe that a man can be actually swallowed by a fish, you're going to be here it's going to be a long journey for you because it's a metaphor." And so, and for me, that didn't change the way I looked at Jonah and the stories that it provides. And it still it still, whether Jonah happened or not doesn't affect my faith. And so whether I know who's going to win or not, or what the all the behind stuff, it doesn't mean I'm not going to enjoy the product. So
Right.
it's one of those things where you know what's going on, but you appreciate it more because you know what's going on.
Yeah, no, I think it is actually an interesting metaphor. It's like, the idea of suspension of disbelief, and then you get to a point where you do have to take a leap of faith to a certain degree with wrestling. But there's you and I are, like I said, we were born into it. So as children, you watch it, you're indigenized to it. You have your that common ground of, you were saying, well, Hulk Hogan is brought you into it. I was trying to describe Hulk Hogan to someone in Europe, and it was really funny. They go, "What do you mean Hulk Hogan?" I go, "Well, Google him," and they're like, "Why are you?" I was like, "It's a big part of the Gen X identity is this guy," and it was like he's got skin. His skin is like looks like a hot dog color, and he's got like the silken hair, like.
It does. I never thought of it that way. It is hot dog color.
Right, he's like a silken hair, and then he's got what's called, like, he's got this sort of Hulkamania strength, and they're like, "What's that?" I go, "It doesn't matter what you do to him. He can he's gonna end up on the ground, oppressed, and then as soon as the Hulkamania, like the power comes to him, there's nothing you can do. He starts convulsing and shaking with his hands, and you can keep hitting him as hard as you want with anything and an object, and he'll just stand up, and then they'll start hitting you,
Oh
and
my
before you know
God.
it, he's got to clothesline you and then get you with the boot."
Oh
and,
my
and they're like,
God.
"I don't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about." And I was speaking in Russian to the guy, and he goes, "I don't even understand what you're talking about." I go, "Just Google it. Google Hulk Hogan finish, and it'll come up." And he like watched it. He goes, "That was spot on description." I go, "Yeah, those words, none of that chain of words in those 3 to 5 sentences that I just said don't make any sense to anyone in the real world. And it's everything that's wonderful about human civilization and everything that's terrible. And that's what we should be sending into space for
Oh
aliens
my
to see.
God. That's hilarious.
So, but that silken hair, he's got that, that blonde hair that's, is not, it's not like a big coif like.
Well, he's bald. That's why. It's just this hair. He still
Yeah,
has that big bald spot.
yeah, but it's like that whitish silken, straight down. So, but yeah, and we knew that was coming. We knew that the thunder was going to get called down, and they were going to get smited. So that was just the way it worked. So you're back into reality. Maybe we'll shift. So, um, so we reached out and I thought, what a great conversation. Your faith journey is really interesting, and you're Episcopalian pastor, but you didn't start off in the Episcopalian world. You're originally a Methodist.
Yes.
And you come from a Methodist family. Your father was a Methodist preacher. Is preacher the right term? Is that
pastor, preacher?
Pastor,
yeah.
Preacher?
And I think technically it's Episcopalian priest. I think our denomination calls our clergy priest. And someone asked me what's the difference between a priest and a pastor, and I was semantics. I don't know.
Well,
I should know, but I don't.
Well, so Episcopalians are Anglican adjacent, right? So
yes.
So they're the Anglican. So Anglican Church broke from the Catholic Church, and the king is in charge, and there's bishops. And then in America, it's the Episcopalian Church, but they don't adhere to the king. They have a council.
We have our own thing. History in a nutshell is when we won the Revolutionary War and we were coming up with our government, set up, and the founding fathers were adamant that we not be under the King of England anymore since we won the Revolutionary War. Then the religious side was, well, if our government isn't going to be under the King of England, why do we have to be under the Church of England? And so that's how the Episcopalian denomination started. We are still in the Anglican Communion, but anything that the Anglican Church decides does not affect us.
Okay. But they have vicars.
We do too.
Okay, so walk me through this. So is a vicar a priest?
So
I just know that because I lived in England. So I was like, I didn't realize there was a pantheon of different titles, but there must be.
Yeah. So what I should mention, I've only been an Episcopalian from 2019, and everything I've been drinking, straight from the fire hose because I've just been inundated with a bunch of terms and languages. From what I can figure out, technically I'm a vicar, and a vicar is a church, a priest of a church that receives funding for his or her salary from the diocese. So it's not a self-sustaining church. So what vicar means is the bishop vicariously ministers through the vicar. I think vicar is like a short for vicariously.
Okay.
At least that's what I've been told in the Episcopal Church. I'm assuming it's similar to England as well. And then if a church is self-sustaining and can support their clergy 100%, they're called a rector.
Okay. And what's a priest?
We're still priest. I think priest
you're
is
all
just So you have a rector who's the Episcopalians and the Anglicans, they love their church terms. There's so many terms that I had to learn. I'm still learning. So
what's the weirdest one?
Sexton is one, and that's the custodian. But the weirdest one is the Piscina.
What's that?
It's
because I'm afraid to ask because it doesn't sound.
No. It's just here's me 44 years old and laughing at words at at like Sexton and Piscina because I'm still a 13-year-old boy inside. It's this. So when we are done with the sacraments, service is over. There's ways that we I don't want to use the word dispose, but there's a way that we have to dispose the sacraments. One thing that we can't do is pour wine, the leftover wine, down a regular sink where it goes into the sewer system. That's the big no-no. So a piscina is a sink that's built in, and the sink leads straight to the ground outside. So you pour it in there, and it funnels the wine to the back of the church on like grass or something, so it doesn't go down the sewer system.
So it goes to like hollowed ground. or
just
something like that. I don't know.
I guess it would be hollow too, because I mean, like, look, for instance, a while ago, I was telling my people that after church, when we used to live in Santa Barbara, we would go to the park, my son and I, and feed the leftover communion bread to the ducks. And that was before we realized that bread is bad for birds. So once we found that out, we stopped doing it. But I got chastised by a colleague saying that that's how dare you defame like like something that holy, how dare you like do that to the bread. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, why would you give it to the birds? And I was like, I don't understand, because we're not supposed to there's a couple of ways to store the leftover bread, and one of them is to scatter out in the grass in the garden of the church so that birds and squirrels can get it. And I'm
Right.
like, so what's the difference if I hand it directly to the bird rather than on the ground?
Sure.
And the priest looked at me and goes, it just doesn't feel right. I'm like, well, like what? So there's a lot of little rules and stuff that I'm still figuring out, but
Do you believe in transubstantiation? Does it turn into the blood and body?
we I can't, I'm pretty sure most of the Protestant mainline denominations do not believe in transubstantiation. I think that's a uniquely Roman Catholic thing. We
Right.
believe, we call it real presence, that mysteriously Christ is present in the gifts of bread and wine, but we do not believe that it becomes the actual flesh and blood of Jesus.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because yeah, it's a Catholic thing. I just didn't know how much of that transferred over to the Anglican Church when they changed from the Pope to the King. I didn't know.
Yeah.
All right. So it's, well, that might be like, because but it's still there. That idea that it's holy, and it's gotta be on. Birds can eat it on hallowed ground, but not in the park.
Just that part, like sometimes religion just doesn't make sense. It's
Yeah.
like,
Well,
what are we doing here?
well, and the problem is that a lot of it has to do, like in Islam, we deal with it a lot. We deal with a lot with like cultural norms
Mm.
that soak into the faith, and so it has nothing to do with Islam, but it has a lot to do with cultural norms. Like the cultural dress and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of different elements that you kind of have to argue your way out of, or you have to say, well, if it's comfort to you, that's fine, but know that that's not the faith, right? Then that's not, it's not Quranic. It's not in the Sunnah or Hadith or any of that stuff. So, but so maybe let's unpack for a minute your background. You grew up Methodist, and your father was a pastor, was a priest, right? Or a preacher,
Pastor,
pastor.
preacher, pastor.
Yeah. So what is the Methodist Church? Let's start with that.
The Methodist Church is also part. They're not officially part of the Anglican Communion, but it started out as an Anglican because the founder of the Methodist Church was John Wesley, who was an Anglican priest. Um, and they were called the Methodists because I think John Wesley's way of discipleship was very methodical. So it was actually a derogatory term that they were being called Methodists, and apparently that's the name that stuck. Um,
Okay.
and that's how the Methodist Church started. And I think it's
He broke away. Why? Like, what was his situation? He said, the angles of the Anglican Church were not right.
well, no, John Wesley never meant to start another denomination. He was
Okay.
just trying to get people to do things in a certain way within the Anglican Church. I should know this because I went to a Methodist seminary, but I forget why the Methodists split from the Anglican Church.
Okay. It's Googleable. That's all right. But
Ask
but it
ChatGPT, it'll tell you.
sure. So the Anglican Church, so the Methodists broke away. They opened up their own thing, and you grew up in a Methodist house.
I did. We grew up in a Korean United Methodist house, which is another subsect of the United Methodist Church.
What was the
So,
word you said?
Korean United Methodist
Oh,
Church.
Korean. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
because
Yeah.
my dad served immigrant churches, Korean immigrant churches. So because we moved to the States when I was 6 years old in 1986, and because my parents predominantly worked with other Korean speaking people, they're still very limited in their English, even though we've been here for almost 40 years now. And sometimes it gets awkward because, like a couple months ago, I had to accompany my dad to his urologist appointment, which, I learned a lot about my dad that one son should never really know
Right. Yeah.
about
You don't want
their
to know about
father.
that section of the body on your
Yeah.
father. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, every time I go and sit with my dad, there's at least other you know uh generational, like a father and son group. And so I'm assuming that the father's also limited in English, and that's why their son's there too. So it's funny to see, but I don't think people who speak just English or non-immigrants don't understand the burden that's on the child, the oldest child of an immigrant son or child that speaks English, because they often end up becoming the de facto translator for that family. And I remember
Sure.
at 12 years old, I'm trying to explain to my dad like an insurance policy. I'm 12. I have no idea so we're both trying to figure it out. And it's interesting. But yeah, I predominantly grew up in a Korean United Methodist church that often function like an evangelical church. So I didn't get to skip out on the evangelical trauma that that a lot of my peers are deconstructing from now.
Okay, so like prayer circles, the laying of hands,
Prayer
and that,
circles, purity culture, all that just trauma inducing stuff.
yeah. So fire and brimstone, is that a big thing? The hell thing, or
Not from my dad, but from the Sunday school volunteers and youth pastors that my dad hired. Yes. I mean, I remember vividly at 10 years old, we went to our Sunday school teacher had a lock-in, and that lock-in, we watched a movie about end times and like how people like who got left behind woke up with sores, and it was just traumatic. And the movie ended with when the movie ended, we had a discussion, and the youth Sunday school teacher was like, if you don't repent from your sins, this is going to be your fate. And now, if you really love your friends, you should tell them to become Christians so that they avoid this fate. And you're hearing this, and you're like, oh my God, thank God my family is a Christian. Like I don't think about, but my friends, and it's just like this really traumatic thing that was just like, oh yeah, no, this is part of church. This is part of life. You should be afraid of these things.
right? Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a tough. I mean, I think all faiths have that more, one way or another. They have, the idea this, of what could happen to you. I think the uniqueness of Christianity is that you're damned forever.
Yeah, you're
Like
in hell
that's just
forever.
yeah. Well, it's like it's such a pivot point because God, the God of the Old Testament, even if he didn't like you, he just smite you, and that would be it. And then the New Testament is very, very tough. It's very tough for Muslims because it's all or nothing.
Hmm.
And in the Quran, it's if you're people of the book. So if you're everybody is kind of looked at as born Muslim, doesn't matter what denomination you are, but if you're a person of the book, and meaning Jewish or Christian, you're kind of like on track. You might have broken a covenant or two with God, with Allah, so but everybody has access. It eventually there might be some kind of weird sort of purity thing going on for a little while, but everybody ends up in Jannah, which just means garden, and whatever that is highly questionable because it's very ambiguous in the cross. But everybody kind of ends up there. But yeah, that's one of the not so nice selling points. It's like this: if you don't, it's you're done.
And that's more of an evangelical slant to it too, because like personally, uh, I've stopped talking about heaven and hell at church unless I'm asked by persons. But usually my response is, it seems like Jesus was more concerned about what we do in this life now, and who cares? I mean, not who cares, but like, there's so many more important things to worry about right now than to discuss what happens after we die.
Right.
And I've always been there's a lot of unpacking I have to do, and I'm realizing, while I'm now starting this church, a lot of my church trauma, I'm becoming aware of it because I'm overreacting to some things, and I've always been a firm believer that how you get people into church is what you have to do to get them to stay. So if you entertain people into your church, you're gonna have to keep them entertained, or they're gonna
Right.
leave. They're gonna find. But if you scare people into church, you're gonna have to keep them scared. Otherwise, they're gonna find the church. So I think what's happening in the past 5 years in the evangelical, particularly the evangelical Christian circle, is this thing called deconstruction, where they're now deconstructing everything that I believed in. And part of it is we grew up with so much fear because that's what the churches instilled in us. And now we're looking at, wait, if we're not as afraid anymore, and because we're not afraid anymore, we're figure out why we're not afraid. So we're all just deconstructing from that because the fear's not working anymore. But for some people, it's a fear is the easiest tool to use and to manipulate. I mean, politicians on all spectrums use fear to get us to vote for them.
Sure.
But in Christian circles, it's just really antithesis of who we are, because we have a scripture, that's a verse that says, "Perfect love casts out fear." We talk about how God is love, but we have to scare people to understand that God is love. And so it doesn't make sense.
Sure. Yeah, no, in Islam we have this very similar sort of problem, or challenge, is that you have sort of political Islam, which is an anti-colonial movement, and that is just plays on people's fears, right? So on
Mm.
fear of livelihood, fear of, of agency, fear of, of identity. It's like, are you really Muslim? And so that's how that sort of political move, that Muslim Brotherhood, and the Salafism, and which there's 4 schools of jurisprudence on the Sunni side and 4 on the Shia side that are mainstream, and then so there's 8 schools, right? And maktabs, they call them. And so, but one, the Hanbali, is where you get a lot of this extremist stuff, this fundamental stuff. And so the problem is that it plays on fear, and then turns on and says there's something you can do, and what you can do is fight, right? And or when I was in Afghanistan, it was really interesting. You can make $400 or $500 or $600 working legitimately, or you can make $1,000 working for the Taliban or ISIS or the Daesh. These, and so it's a livelihood issue, right? So yeah, and then from there they're like, listen, we just need you to do this, and then they start chipping away at what you need to do. And so it's a different sort of mechanism, because it has to do a lot with this sort of post-colonial ideology related to fears, and the fears tie back to even stuff like the Crusades and retribution for the Crusade, like stuff. It goes back to that, because that's seen as a colonial sort of element, in political Islam. But you grew up Methodist. Your father was a preacher, a Methodist preacher, and then you decided. How did you come to
Yeah.
the
So
Episcopalian church?
for those of you that are not familiar with the Methodist tradition, the United Methodist Church has a itinerary system, meaning that the bishop of your jurisdiction, of your, we call it annual conference, diocese or geographical, boundaries of that uh, area, the bishop tells you where to go within that conference. And we moved to Texas in 2016, and in 2019, I was being told to move to a city in East Texas. And, when we were first moving from California to Texas, East Texas was like the stereotypical like Texas that we were thinking about, like not very friendly to outsiders and all that stuff. But practically, Houston in 2016 was the most diverse city in the United States. In 2019, I don't know if we were the most, but we were still one of the most diverse cities in the United States. The bishop was asking me to move from one of the most diverse cities in the United States to a city that had 0.1% Asian population. And on top of that, my son is on the autism spectrum, and we didn't know what kind of services the school system had. And like they don't give you that much time to discern. My boss called me on a Friday at like 3 p.m. when everyone in school districts are going home, and I had to respond by Sunday. So I had no chance to like even research what kind of special ed provisions that they had. And we were also receiving outside of school therapy. And when I and that's from Texas Children. And when I talked to Texas Children's people, they said that if we moved to that area, we'd have to be on the waiting list all over, and there's a long waiting list. So basically, it just didn't seem like a move I could make that would benefit my family. And ideally, you're not supposed to say no to the bishop's move. And I was like, I can't go. I'm not going to go. And that made the bishop feel a certain way. And that was one of the most toughest meetings. I think I told you in a previous conversation, that meeting took place on Ash Wednesday, and it was the most surreal thing to see my two, the bishop and my boss, with ashes on their foreheads. I had ashes on my forehead, and he just reamed in, like he just ripped me, like I think I wrote somewhere, he undressed me so much that I literally felt like I was naked. Like I just felt shame and like defeated and whatnot. And so I was going to be, I had, I left the meeting with three options. Either I take the appointment, I go to
Right.
this place called Chandler in Texas, or I take a leave of absence for a year and get back on the appointment process come January of 2020.
Right.
I leave. I move to a different conference, and I wasn't going to do number one. Number two, I was afraid that if I took a year off and found some secular work and then made my way back to the appointment system, the bishop still has power to send me anywhere he desires. So I was afraid that he might send me to even more of a rural space. So we were trying to move out of Texas, and nothing was happening. No doors were opening. All the doors were slowly closing on me, and I was starting to panic. And then my friend from the Episcopal Church in from the Diocese of Texas reached out to me, and we started talking. And he said there's this opportunity to start a new church in the city that I lived in, and all that I had to do was I had to be an Episcopalian to do it. Um, and at first, I was like, nah, I don't want to learn a whole new system. I'm comfortable with the institution of the Methodist Church. I know the ins and outs, and I know where we are ineffective and all that stuff. I was like, I don't want to learn a whole new field.
Sure.
But after a while, one, out of sheer desperation, no other jobs were, available, and two, uh, it also felt right. I don't know if it felt right because I had no other options, but it just felt like that was the most logical step of the next chapter of my life. So that's how I became an Episcopalian, and that was like July 1st, 2019 was my first day as an Episcopalian.
Oh, so I mean, so there's a practical element to it, right? But then there's also a nut that you had to kind of go, you had to conquer, right? It's not easy. You have to go through seminary again, right?
I got lucky in that my bishop shotgunned me through the ordination process as much as it was possible, following all the big rules. So I didn't. The one thing that I'll be forever grateful for Bishop Andy Doyle is that he never made me go back to seminary to get Anglican studies. I got to skip out on that, and everyone is wondering how that happened, and I'm just like, it just happened. I'm just grateful.
Right.
So I did not have to go through seminary again, but I did have to go through a second ordination process.
So you what did the top what did you say from a being able to be in both parts of the faith? Because a lot of the questions that we get on the podcast is like, Methodist, Episcopalian, and it's what would be the top three differences if you were to say, if the Methodist Church is this, and this, and the Episcopalian Church is this, and this, and that's
Yeah, there is more freedom in the Methodist Church. If you go to a Methodist church, you don't know what you're walking into. You can walk into a Methodist church that feels like an evangelical Southern Baptist church with stage lights and smoke machines and rock band, or you can walk into a Methodist church that's really traditional. You have the choirs and the candles and the robes and all that. For the most part, in the Episcopal Church, you will run into there's not that much difference of how Episcopal Church does worship when you go to an Episcopal Church to Episcopal Church to Episcopal Church because we follow the Book of Common Prayer. But theology wise, the big picture wise, the Methodist and the Episcopal and the Anglican, they're very, very similar approach to everything. It's how the local church is governed. It's how the institution is ran. That's where the biggest difference lies in all the denominations. Like for instance, like I said, the Methodist Church is an appointment system. The bishop tells you when to go and where to go. So like you could be doing really good, in year 9 of this church, and there's so much, and you're happy, and everyone's happy, and the bishop can say, "Hey, I think that church down in the city next to you could really use your gift, so you'll be starting there in July 1st." So like that. Whereas the Episcopal Church is pretty much like a call system where a church places an opening that they need a priest, and you apply and you go through the screening process and you go through the interview process, and then you get hired. So uh, it's those kind of things that really differ from denomination to denomination. Like the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church, and the Methodist Church, we believe in infant baptism. We will baptize your babies, but like the Baptist Church won't ever baptize babies because they believe that it has to be a believer's baptism. You have to confess that you want to be baptized.
sure.
So It's always those little things that differ from denominations. I mean, the big tenets of Christians still is still pretty much similar. You know, Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, and all that stuff. That's pretty the same in
Yeah.
most denominations.
You started this new church. You've been in this church now since when?
We started I started the work in 2019, but we were supposed to launch in 2020, but obviously the world had different plans, so we launched in 2021. So the church is now we just celebrated our third anniversary last September, so we're in year four, I guess.
So when you start a church. So first of all, like what I'm just asking. I'm asking
Yeah.
because so we, like I'm in a town that's, I think every town is Church City, USA, and where they've got steeples, and I'm not sure. My biggest gripe about Christianity is that none of the bells are timed right. So, like, you guys all have different, like, no one has the same noon time. So, like, it just seems like
That's
like that's
hilarious.
like, and if you guys, so everybody's operating on a different like time calendar, like, so, and it's like seconds, it's like 30 seconds different here, four, maybe 3 minutes different over here, but you get at like noon, you get like this whole thing starting somewhere around like 11:38, where someone's bell chant is off, and then it goes all the way to like 12:20, because they're all, and part of me feels like it's a competition thing. They're
To see
like,
who's the loudest or fastest.
well, or it's like, oh, they want to own noon, where we're going to own 12:05, like, with our, because they're all different chimes, they're all different gates of the bell. So it's it we you'll sit there, and we've got, just here we've got, I think, 10 churches just in the small Rondout area, right?
Hmm.
And it's just, you never know. Is First of all, is anybody doing anything by the bells? That's the one question. And is that a phrase? Do you say, "Oh, I'll meet you by the bell at 2"? I don't know. And then on top of that, they've got it. And so there's a lot of tradition in when things are happening. But then the next step is that they, like I said, nobody's coordinating. But there's certainly no communion of bell ringing in the Christian pantheon. I'll just be honest with you. But the question is like, so, like, what is just an outsider,
That was a weird tangent.
just, yeah, but just an outsider when it comes to that. Um, and I think about it every day because I hear it every day. Just so you know, it's like, but here's the question. So, like, how do you focus on what defines that we need a church here?
Right.
Uh,
In our situation context, we live in a city called Pearland, and it's growing really fast. And we have two sections of Pearland now because we have East Pearland, the old, like the original Pearland, and then we have West Pearland, the new, like it's the new Pearland where it's being built, and more people are coming in, particularly people of color, because there's a highway that shoots straight to the Med Center where a lot of people are moving in from now. On the west side, there's no other Episcopal church. And so I guess they felt that it would be nice to have an Episcopal presence in that city. And then I don't think there's another Episcopal church within like a 10-mile radius from us, or maybe, yeah, I think St. Andrews is 10 miles from us. So that's the idea, that they just wanted to have an Episcopal church there, and our diocese has the means to fund church plant. So that's why they decided to do that, and I just happened to be available at the right time. It was just, it was a God ordained thing because so many things had to fall in place for this to happen.
right.
So we met, our paths crossed at the most perfect time, and so we were able to start this venture together with the Episcopal
So,
Church.
so the church is growing, which is that's kind of interesting. That's kind of, and it's
Yeah, I had no idea what this would look like, especially since our my first year was through the pandemic, but we are currently averaging about 60 people on a Sunday.
okay.
Um, and which is the average. That's like I think the average size of a church in the United States.
Right. And then is there an evangelistic type of element to it, or is it just it's like we're popping open the doors and
Oh, oh, I see what you mean. No, no, yeah, absolutely. There's an evangelistic component to it. We just don't. We just the word evangelize has become such a
right. Yeah, I mean in
uh,
the sense that you're doing outreach, I
yeah,
guess,
no,
engagement.
constantly, I'm always trying to make contacts with people, meeting new people, asking my church people to meet new people. I told them that this year we're not going to spend that much money on like advertising kind of stuff because the best form of advertisement is word of mouth. So like uh I'm trying to get people to invite the people that in their lives to join in the work that we're doing. And the way that we started this church, I should tell the context too. The way the original idea of this church was we're in a pretty red county. In 2017, when Harvey hit and when President Trump in his first term came to visit Houston, he only stopped by one church, and that church was in my city.
Hmm.
And so it's a very, just to give you the political of the just of our
Political
city.
climate. Yeah.
Yeah. So we and before the pandemic, there was like a new church popping up in Pearland every other month. There's
Hmm.
this particular coffee shop that I work out of as my office, and at some point, I just stopped talking to people because uh, every person I started meeting at the coffee shop was a pastor that just planted a church, and I was like, ugh, what's the point of talking to other pastors? You can't invite them to your church. Uh,
Sure.
so but all those churches were fairly evangelical, and there's only two churches now, ourselves and the other Episcopal church on the other side of town, that are fully inclusive, embracing and honoring. Like we are come as you are. Even we're looking out to make sure that our LGBTQI siblings have a space and whatnot. So we are this weird oasis. I hopefully we're trying to be a space where people feel safe to really ask the questions that they weren't allowed to ask, but more importantly, giving them space so that they can just be themselves. And I think that's especially especially right now with how many people in my community and people I haven't come are just scared of what might happen to them. It's been a way to provide some sort of sanctuary or safe space, saying, "Hey, I know we don't have the answers, but uh, we're here with you, and we're walking with you, and we've got you back as best as we can." And so that's been helpful to differentiate us from the thousands of churches that are in my city.
Right. Yeah. So it's that. What an interesting take. You've got a is it I know dignity is a big part of all faiths, but in the definition within the Episcopalian Church is this inclusive element and the love thy neighbor component, and that really brings true when it comes to, like I said, inclusivity and bringing people in. And just a disclaimer: in Islam we have two moons. So I know I was talking about the bells, but we have two moons. So when Maghrib prayer is sundown, and you can look on your weather app on your phone, and when it says sundown is when you do Maghrib prayer if you're Sunni, right? If you're Shia, it has to be declared by whomever you're following, right? So if you're following Sistani, like the Ayatollah Sistani is in Iraq, he declares when sundown happens. So we just got off of Ramadan, and so in Ramadan you do rosa, which rosa is the breaking of the fast, and then iftar is the meal. And so a lot of times, so the Sunni community will just end up right at sundown. Okay, it's sundown, and then they're doing rosa, and then Shia will wait a little bit longer because they're waiting for it to be declared, or they have to check to make
Interesting.
sure that it's defined as sundown by an authority. So we have two moons. We have our own time issues, just so you know.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's just a weird quirk of how, which how each Sunni and Shia follow, even like you said, the four and the four, how they practice, and it's goofy in many respects. But it's a funny quirk that only from like within. So,
I mean, if
but
you look at all of our religions from like a 30,000 feet view, it's some of the stuff just doesn't make any sense. It just seems silly.
well, like so I have. I have a sajda. I have a piece of the soil from a holy site, and so that's what Shia do. So you have the janamaz, the prayer rug, and you put the prayer rug down, and then you put the sajda down, right? And so I put it down and out, and that's where your head goes, right? So so you're actually praying on like holy or hallowed ground, right? Sunnis don't care. They don't care, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, so I feel really uncomfortable if my head touches the janamaz. I feel really weird, So I have a necklace that I have on, and when I don't have the sajda on me, it has a stone that's from Karbala, which is it's a holy site, and so I'll put it down, and then I'll pray, and my head will touch, and so. There's all these strange sort of nuances that are involved in practice, and so I'm one of these guys. Like I'm Ismaili, I'm Ismaili, right? So we're like Islam after hours. We're an esoteric sect. So so there's a lot of sort of ritual in our and so there's and that I'm used to that. So it's a different way of kind of like looking at the way. And we also have the Imam of Time, the Aga Khan, who's not a prophet, but somebody sort of interprets the Quran for the present day. And so and so we have that as well. But which is different because there's no central authority in any of the faiths, right? So you have who you follow or who your Imam is, and then your mom will be tied to somebody who's like a larger authority, but it's not formal like bishops and stuff like that. It doesn't work that way. But we're one of the few sects that's got a sort of tight command and control through what's called the Jamaat, which is the community within, and then but my position, my jobs on the civilian side has been working for the American Islamic Congress and a number of other organizations where it was my job to engage the Ummah, the global community. So I would like salat out. I'd pray with everybody and learn how they do things differently. And it was just like really funny. I don't know how many times people say, you don't know what you're doing. You don't praying right. And I'm like, well, show me how you do it. And then we kind of go through it because like Sunnis, other funny thing that Sunnis will pray with their hands like this, crossed over their lap, right?
Interesting.
Like this. And then, but Shia will have their hands at their sides. And so that's just a good way of telling what, and there's no real purpose in it other than, somebody somebody interpreted how prayer was conducted by the prophet. And the problem is, so, unlike Jesus, and I've talked about this on a lot of the podcast, Hazadisa, peace be upon him and all that stuff, is that we had the prophet and we have people that were surrounded him. And you have the Quran, you have the Sunnah and Hadith. The Sunnah is how the prophet lived, right? How Muhammad lived, and the Hadiths are sayings. And so there's a process to verify what's in the Sunnah and the Hadiths. So like, there's testimonies and, where the reasonable expectation this did happen, or this was said. And so unlike the Hazadis, unlike Jesus, the idea that, the apostles are floating around, no one's writing anything down. No, these guys were writing that stuff down, and I'm speaking in broad strokes here. I don't want to commit a hate crime. So yeah. So the challenge is that we have a lot of information, but these nuances show up where in how prayer is conducted. And so, but by and large, doing like you do your namaz, you do rakat namaz, you do is generally the same on both Sunni and Shia. There's just one little difference on the Shia side is this thing called kunut, which is when you talk about the next in line Ali, and so the Shia follow the family line, and Sunnis are have school of jurisprudence. And that's kind of like the difference, So, but broad strokes. I mean, if you ask me, I'll tell you. Can kind of, I'll tell you. I can tell you the difference between Sunni and Shia in 3 minutes if you're interested. But there's all these strange little nuances, and even though we know that the prophet exists, we know what happened and what he did, and we have these slots of like Sunnah and Hadith and the Quran. Still, there's these strange nuances that no one, I say no one knows why we do it, someone will say this is why we do it, but the reality is no one really knows why we do it. It's just these differences to differentiate a little bit, or it's a tradition that comes from this. They'll say, oh, after this event, the hands was at the sides because of this, and that's why we do it as an honor to, and so it's an optional thing, but it becomes a culturally Shia or culturally Sunni thing. Yeah,
that's fascinating. Yeah, religion is so. I mean, it's fascinating too, but it's on one hand, a lot of it just seems silly, but on the other hand, it just seems really fascinating, like how things just happen to become a norm.
Yeah, and the problem is like you just get used to it, and so it comforts you and it's close to you, or like a lot of the things that I do, Papa taught me. So it's like, so I got to I kind of think about it, and I think of him, so I'm associating some of that with him, and so and even if I know it's not right, I'll say, Papa, who would say, what I say is ancient and indisputable with the finger in the air, and you're like, okay, it's kind of funny. Let's go with that. So was your father upset with you when you changed over into the Episcopalians? I mean, what was the fallout?
Yeah, there was no fallout. But I did not know that much about the Episcopal Church before 2019. The only like just like when I clocked it was when the presiding bishop Michael Curry gave the sermon for the royal wedding for Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding. That's when I realized, oh, that's when I first like really understood that of the Episcopal Church or knew something about it. My parents didn't know anything about the Episcopal Church, and their biggest concern was that somehow, some way, I will get roped into this thing, and it'll turn out to be a scam, and it'll be left. I'd be left with like no job, no nothing. So their concern for me was twofold. One, my parents being the conservative traditional type of Christian, where prayer solves everything. You just sit and pray. Was saying things like, maybe you're more attuned to your son's needs than what God is calling you to do. And my response was, I don't, I know there's a part of our tradition from the Korean tradition, like that honors sacrifice of family for the sake of the church. There's a lot of Korean pastors who think like that. And I was like, that makes no sense for me. I feel like if God wouldn't send me to a place where it would be a detriment to my son's development. Sure. So, but there was a moment where my mom was like, why don't you just go where the bishop's sending you and everything will work out? And I was like, at this point, like
it's providential. Right.
Yeah, well, yeah, but at this point, I'm on the bishop's blacklist. Like, there's no good for me to stay. Like, that bishop is going to always hold something against me if
Or he burned you to the ground on Crash Wednesday.
Exactly.
Like, isn't that the day of like Lent, the start of Lent, and you're supposed to be like looking inward and
be reminded of our mortality. From dust you came, and dust you shall return. No, I got my ass. Can I say that? I got my butt kicked by the bishop. But and the other thing was the practical thing, and the funniest thing is I never thought my dad was like this. Because my dad is very can be viewed very fanatic, very extremist. Like one time, someone gifted my dad a chunk of money, and my dad just gave it straight to the church and was like, "Oh, that's good, thank you. We'll put it to the church." And my dad was telling me that story, and I was like, "We could have used that money as a family, like." So, but when my soon-to-be Episcopalian boss handed me the salary package. I showed the contract to my dad. My dad's like, "Oh, they have this kind of money? Yeah, go for it." So that was it.
Well, I mean, like the practicality, I think, is important. And like, how do you, it's a profound question. How do you know which one is providential? Like that. How would you?
Exactly. So, it's just sometimes you just got to go by your gut feeling. And at that point, everything within me was screaming, this is the next chapter of your life.
Right.
So, and my dad, I think my parents are well aware that it doesn't matter what they say at this point. We're gonna do whatever. Like our son, we adopted him through the foster system before we moved out of California, before we moved to Texas. And I remember the conversation that we had with my parents about going through. We were first his foster parents. We never intended to adopt him, but when they were first against us being foster parents, and then they were really, 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 really against us adopting Nathaniel. And at some point, I was like, it doesn't matter what you guys think, like this is going to
Right.
be what we want to do as a family. So you're
Sure.
either going to support us or we're going to do it without you, but it's going to happen. So
Right.
I think, we already crossed that road. So I figured my dad was like, just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to be in a financial hardship. And part of it is because he and my mom, the time that in like 92 to 96, when we first lived in Santa Barbara, that was one of their most toughest seasons of their career and life. And a lot of it was because, he left the church. He was brought over to a church, and it turned out to be a really big mistake. And he left that church and started a new church. And in the meantime, there was no money. He had no job, whatever. So I think that was his trauma telling me to not take this job because he was afraid something like that would happen to me. But once he saw the contract, he was like, oh, okay.
Well, it's great that you won them over. I think most parents care about their child's livelihood and well-being, and so and of course spiritually or esoterically, astrologically, there might have been some question, but then if you end up having, the benefit of some kind of good benefit package
Yeah.
and finances, then providential, it's not that much of a leap to something that's providential, right? So,
Yeah.
well, so are you, what's the agenda of a new church? So what's like the church was already built.
No, we are leasing a commercial property that used to be a bakery. So we're in the strip mall where Dollar Tree. We're sandwiched between a taekwondo studio and a dentist practice, and then the biggest foot traffic in our little strip mall is a Dollar Tree.
Dollars.
So
So it sounds like you're saying idolatry. That's I had to hear you. I was like, what? I lead. I don't know if you saw my face when you first said it. So because you said Dollar Tree and then you blew through it, and I go, what? What are we talking about?
no,
And
no.
then yeah,
The
okay, so
store. Well,
Dollar
and
Tree.
now everything's $1.25, but they're not going to change the name. It's not nothing's a dollar at the Dollar Tree anymore.
Right.
So we had that space because of the previous because of the other Episcopal Church started this process and they just needed someone else to oversee it full time. And so the first couple of things was just getting to meet the people in my city, like joining the Chamber of Commerce and just connecting with people, giving my card out to them and whatnot. And then so you just gotta network and start meeting with a lot of people, and then invite them into if they if you vibe with them and they seem like they want to be part of something new and something good and whatever, you just start inviting them to certain things, and then you ask them to commit to serve being part of a leadership team, whatnot. That's what you're supposed to do. But we skipped all that because all that during the time I was supposed to do that, we were shut down because of the pandemic.
Right.
So we started online services first. So people got to know me through that, and then you know that easily led to going on TikTok and making content there. And then next thing I know, like I have this huge no, I wouldn't say huge. I have a decent following on TikTok and Instagram where now, like I'm also connecting with people who don't live in Texas.
Right.
So it's you just start out just meeting as much people as you do, certain that what you are being called to do can can really resonate with people. And I know a lot of church people hate to use like business terms like marketing and branding, but you know, I leaned heavily into that. The one thing that was going to differentiate us from the, you know, there's 4 churches within a walking distance from our shopping center. They are also leasing out shopping centers, and so like how do we differentiate ourselves from the plethora of churches, from the oversaturated church market in our
Sure.
city? And the one thing that we had that no one else had was this commitment to inclusivity. And so we ran with that. The biggest hurdle was what that I realized was the people that I really want to connect with, the ones who have been just disillusioned by church or burnt by church or unwelcome, like those are the people that I really had a heart for, to connect to let them know that even though we let you down before, we want to be there to help you with your journey of life, whether it's, whether you believe in God or not. But the biggest hurdle that I didn't think about, which is when I think about it, is that these people who were hurt by the church don't want to be part of the church anymore.
Yeah.
So we had this weird, I still have this thing where certain people would come and have coffee with me, or get lunch with me, or if we're doing some kind of service project, like if a couple of years ago, my city had our first Black Lives Matter march. Um, which was really interesting, and was led by high schoolers. High schoolers put this together and all that stuff. And so I got to invite people to come with me and march on that. They will do all that kind of stuff. But the moment we talk about being anything like churchy, like coming to church, or like they'll talk about God and all that stuff. But once we talk about like being part of the church, they haven't, and I don't blame them, but it's just too much for them to come back. So I have these people who would even call me their priest or pastor, but would never step foot into a church, because they don't want to do that anymore. And so that was a rude awakening, that I had to, like, oh yeah, that's right, that makes sense. If they're so burned by the church, why would they want to be back at church?
Right.
But they still want to have, every single person wants to feel a sense of belonging. And
Sure.
I think some of the people that I work with, or talk with, they're still like have one foot in the door of faith, not maybe institutional faith, but like faith. So they like to have these deep discussions about. They have some wonderful questions about God, the scriptures, and all that stuff. But they don't want to do that in a church setting. They want to do that over coffee or something. So it's weird.
Well, I mean, and you don't really, I always say that faith is theology, identity, and community, right? So, and you could tap into it for any one or all or two or three of those things, and yeah.
Oh, that reminds me. Because growing up, we were told you have to believe first, and then you have to behave, and then you will belong.
Huh.
And that's what we grew up with. But then, like about 10 years ago, I was like, that's messed up. And the way that I've been approaching my ministry is, you belong first,
Right.
and then you might believe. We don't care about whether you behave, because if you believe, you will live out what you believe, right? So but I learned that belonging is the most important thing. When someone feels like they belong, a lot of the guard is dropped, right?
Sure.
And so that's I mean, that's how cults start, right? Like these people that never that never we're one step away from a cult. I realize that.
Right.
But like, like these people that find cults often don't find a home, and they find this place that they're warmly embraced. So then they're
Sure.
able to be manipulated and
Right.
institutionalized or whatever. And so but the belonging thing is really, really important. And I just really lament how much we overlook the importance of people feeling like they belong to a community, to a space.
Yeah, and it makes such a difference to know, to like, I'm lucky. I know who I am and what I'm about, and I come from this sort of tradition. So it's like, so I was talking with an atheist a couple weeks ago, and I said, even if you came to me and proved to me that God doesn't exist, I still would believe in him. So it doesn't matter. It's like I'm already, like, I'm way out there.
Right.
So so, and he was like, well, and then he asked me, like, what do you like, the chicken or the egg? What do you think? And I said, oh, he goes, well, how do you know what's what? And I said, I go, it was the egg. And he goes, what do you mean? I goes, okay, it was the egg. I go, the egg came. It might have been a dinosaur egg. And then all of a sudden a chicken came out, and that's it. But it was the egg first. It wasn't the chicken that was first. And so he's like, well, how do you know? I go, I know. You know, and he's like, but the debate's been going on. I go, there's no debate. That's it. And it's like, simple as that. And he goes, and I said, so that's my anchor. And here's the thing: I'm more than willing to admit that I might be psychotic. I might have lost touch with reality, and I'm way down that road, and so I'm suffering from psychosis. So I have no understanding of reality. But the problem is that everyone, no matter how many ways you slice it, is sort of sort of like agnostic, right? We don't really, we all might have personal experiences and spiritual experiences, and we might know, but the challenge is no one really can prove, right? So and so you can believe but not care, or believe and care. We're both agnostic in that sense, right? Because we can't generally have the proof. Although I'm sure you're well aware of like apologetics and all this other business that's out there. So, but the challenge is that we have this sort of strange. I have this strange belief system, right? So, and I know that everyone else has their beliefs or non-beliefs, and it's strange to crack, but a lot of that comes from pride in who we are. So and one of the things is like, we don't Ishmaeli or un-Ishmaeli, right? So we don't do that. So you either are it or you're not. And so like the Zoroastrians, or like the Jewish community, you can convert into the Jewish community, but generally you don't Jew or un-Jew, it doesn't work that way. So I mean, generally, I mean, I don't but in any event, I think that we that I think belonging is the point, is that belonging means something. And so I think you were talking about, I mean, you really did answer the question, the idea of this new church in a red town, and there's a need to belong for the other, or for the disenfranchised, or for this or for that. And it really does speak to Hasidissa's, Jesus's priesthood, right? The idea of incorporating and being inclusive, and all that other stuff. So, and what an evolution from the Methodist Church to the Episcopalian, and some of the challenges, the practical elements. But it's not like you moved and then you walked into this sort of cherry church. You gotta build it up a bit, and and kind of figure it out. So, I mean, do you, like, how does it work? Do you have to, is the church, is there like a blessing process for the church? Is there or is it sacred inside? Is there an altar and stuff in there?
Yeah. So we have a communion table and everything like that. We're because we are in a shopping in a place that used to be a bakery, it's not like the typical church feel, which I think works for us, especially those people who might carry a lot more church trauma. Like they walk in and it's like, oh, okay, this isn't what I'm used to. Um, hopefully the idea is that we'll be able to find something that's more sustainable and have a more permanent, probably possibly our own space, but that's not anytime close for us. But
And what makes it a prayer space? What makes it, like, what when, like, you're going to go in there and you're going to say, like, I went to a French Catholic church, and I walked in, and I usually do like a lap. I do like a loop, and I get up to like the front, and I go, what is this? And it was a picture of Jesus, and but he had like a flow. I don't know what it's called, but like the habit. He had like a flowing gown on, and then the bottom of the gown was the French flag. And I
interesting.
was like, oh, are we in a French Catholic church? And like, so, and I was like, because it's here, we're here in Kingston, and so the priest is he's from the French Catholic Church, so he brought his Jesus pick, like it's a painting, and so. But it was like the French flag was on the bottom half, you know what I mean? As he was kind of like leaning towards you, and it was a big thing, almost the size of a door. And so I was like, "What's going on here?" So I got really excited because the questions in the head, so but like and so for him, obviously you got to have all the Catholic business, right? You got to have the altar, and you got to have the saints and the pictures and the stations of the cross and all that stuff, and then you have like the behind the scenes stuff. So, and then for him, he felt compelled to have this Jesus picture, with the French flag, and that's what it sets a tone, I think. What is it that the Episcopalian, like, if you're going to have a church space, what is it that you need?
It all depends, because I just realized, a couple of my colleagues who have been Episcopalian for a long time, they have certain things that they needed. But for me and our church, all we wanted was, it didn't have to be even like an altar. We have a communion table, and our communion table is literally just a regular table that's slightly taller than most, so that I don't have to bend all the way down to pick up the elements that's on the table. So it's catered towards someone my height. I'm 6'2", by the way. It doesn't look like it. Just want to mention that to people. I'm pretty tall. No, but that what you just asked me was fascinating, because I never thought of it that way. We have chairs that are in a row, and we have that communion table, and we have the cross. Outside of that, that's it. The I guess the idea that I was running on is that little verse from Matthew, where Jesus says, "Where two or three are gathered, I'm in the midst of them," and so it's almost like the intention of what we gather here, because we use that space for different things. Like on first Sunday of the month, PFLAG, Brazoria County chapter meets at our church. We have a literacy group that meets at a church. So a lot of things happen in that space, but like, I guess it's what that space. On Sunday mornings we come and we open with prayer, and before we go into singing and all that stuff. So I think it's the intentionality of what we're using that space for. Otherwise, it's just a regular. There's so many. It's a multi-purpose space.
Sure, yeah, because we like a mosque. Sure, there's sort of holy spaces and there's holy places, but you generally have the masala, where is the prayer space, and generally there's a carpet there that's has a tessellation, the sort of repeating patterns, so everybody kind of knows where they're supposed to be. But that's not necessary. I mean, it's nice to have a place to do wuzu, which is to water, to do ablution and wash, and stuff like that. But some people will wash at home and come, and you can do all that. So there's not really, I think, too much directive. If you're if you're going to build a mosque or an embargo, or you're going to do something like that, you're going to build you want the Turks to do it because they like to build domes, and domes are cool, so big domes, but there's not too much. It's not prescriptive, and I think most of my experience, I mean, I've been to a lot of evangelical and Baptist churches now, but I always am trying to figure out, okay, what's going on with the statuary, and what's going on with this. I just had my Episcopalian friend yell at me because she goes, I go, oh, so I said, so how was the ceremony? She goes, there's no ceremony. And I go, well, no, how was the Sunday ceremony? She goes, no, it's a service. And I go, oh, why is it what's the difference? She goes, ceremony is like a wedding, or
That's funny.
one of those event, like an event.
Yeah.
And I said, well, because I'm there, and like, they get the priest, he's got the habit, walks in, he's got they're escorting the candles in, and I'm not sure what's what, it seems like a ceremony to me, because it's all walked in and it's all walked out.
That's funny.
I usually sit if I go with some of my friends to figure out and to be, in this sort of community engagement. Like tonight, I've got a speech about togetherness at Lutheran Evangelical, and which is right down the way here. So I've got to talk about togetherness, and he's like, well, we need a Quranic verse, and we need to do that. And I was like, well, I can speak about togetherness without citing the Quran, but we can go into it. But it's always try to figure out what is going on. But I usually sit in the back, and then I sit with a lot of the elderly guys in the wheelchairs and stuff. And so I kind of hang out with them. And the last time I was at the Catholic Church, they came down, and like, they're just very liberal with the way in which they're shooting that water all over the place, the holy water. It's all over the place. And I was like, this guy, and so, they'll come back to me because I'm with all the old guys and we're all talking and joking around a little bit. And so he's like, why are you leaning over? I go, there's a lot of water that's going to come out of that thing. You know what I mean? And so, but it's really funny how the different nuances of stuff and how you can look at it from the outside, which is why I think we get a lot of questions about this. And I always say, well, just go with a friend and see what's going on and ask questions, and they'll tell you what's appropriate from a standpoint of being respectful. You just got to be careful about this and that, whatever it is, but and ask questions. I just got invited by the Church of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, that should be fun.
Well, this is this is an outsider. It says you're invited, and it says memorial of the death of Jesus. So it's like a funeral, and I was like, what? So at this important event to commemorate the death of Jesus, just as he commanded in Luke 22:19. So I immediately, my co-host, I trolled him a little bit. I said, because he lives right down the street. And I said, I need you to go to a funeral with me. And he was like, oh yeah, whatever you need, bud. And I was like, what's the proper dress? And he goes, what are you talking about? I go, well, and then I said, well, I think it's the funeral, the memorial service for Jesus. And he was like, it's about time, and he goes, he's like, shut up. But I was like, I don't even know. I'm not sure what that means. It's a really peculiar way of going about it.
The Zac Efron Jesus.
Yeah. So I said it might be great
12th.
to go and figure out what's going on, because
have you ever had interaction with the Jehovah's Witnesses?
They come in. Yes, I've had quite a bit, and I love chatting with Jehovah's Witnesses about faith, and they know when the end of times began. Is like,
they're a different sect.
Yeah,
and they're I mean they're different, very different.
Yeah, but they're fun though, because they're out and about and they're engaging and they're always willing to chat. Not that anybody else isn't, but
listen, they're very so.
I have a lot of respect for people that give up their time,
they're very organized. So a couple of years ago, when we were living in Santa Barbara, a Jehovah's Witness people came to my door, like they do door-to-door thing, and I flat out used the sorry I don't speak English card, because I didn't want to talk with them. Just the fastest way to say sorry I don't speak English.
Right.
They asked me, what do you speak? Where are you from? And I said,
Yeah.
oh, I'm Korean. And they go, okay, it was nice meeting you. 2 weeks later, they sent Korean-speaking Jehovah's Witnesses to my house. I love it. And then I had to say, I am so sorry. I got caught lying because my Korean's not that good either. And I was like, oh my God, they're so organized that they sent some Korean-speaking Jehovah's Witnesses because I didn't speak English. Right. And I was like, I guess I should. That's a lesson to never lie.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that it's tough. Pop-ins are tough, especially in this day and age. I in my generation that grew up analog, people would pop in all the time, but it's very, very tough to do a pop-in these days. But I interact with the Jehovah's Witnesses in the Rondout here because I'm part of the business community and everything else quite often, and always the timeline, and I think it's like 1912 or 19 some thereabouts is when the end of days starts, and I'm always curious about timelines. I always ask questions about artifacts and in different faith groups and relics, and stuff like that. But yeah, they have a really interesting way of looking at the world, and so but I got invited to the memorial service, and I'm curious, about what.
I'm also curious why that date, because Good Friday is not the 13th of April. Good Friday is like the 18th of April.
Yeah, well, and like it just seems, yeah, but here's the thing. So this is a national security part of my personality. So it's Saturday, April, because Saturday's their time, right? Isn't that Saturdays? And then it says April 12th, but it's at 9 p.m.
That's so weird.
That's a late, like, so I automatically, I'm just like, I'm very suspicious of late, anything that happens that late. But on a Saturday. and there's no meal guaranteed here, so that makes me even more nervous.
It's 9 o'clock. What, you should have eaten by then. What are you talking
Well, there
about?
should be coffee and cake. There should be.
It's 9 o'clock. Who's drinking coffee at 9 at
You
night?
know. So anything. So, but in any
But
event,
well, but like the Jehovah's Witnesses can't celebrate like the way we do. That they don't celebrate birthdays. They don't celebrate Christmas. So
yeah,
there might be no
holidays.
party foods at all.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't. I mean, yeah, I just don't know. But maybe that's their. Maybe that's their. Their hour. Maybe that's like 9 o'clock is like that. That's when it all begins.
Yeah, I don't know. The things I do know about Jehovah's Witnesses is from like just jokes and like conversations with them. I don't really know much about their. I also know that they don't believe in you can't do blood
Blood
transfusions with.
transfusions. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a challenge.
And to my point, like religions at a 30,000 foot view is very peculiar. Like one of the things that I don't understand is I can't I can't only I can bless the bread. Like I have the magic hands because I went through seminary. And like but my magic hand only carries for the Episcopal Church. I can't consecrate the bread for a Presbyterian church because the God Spirit doesn't move to it's so weird.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, that's the challenge is that, which when I talk to my co-host about this, which because people speaking like to speak in generalities and they talk about, Christian this or so and so. And we deal with religious freedom quite often. And I always kind of say, well, religious freedom in the Constitution was really so that no particular is really about Christianity. It's about the different Christian sects and there's a byproduct from that. The byproduct is that religious minorities are protected as well. But the core element was let's keep religion out of the government, so not one Christian sect is running the show because it's difficult to agree on who's right. And you were talking about your
And
hands,
how's
right?
that working out for us right now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the president started this new religious liberty office of religious liberty, which is different than religious freedom, and so the challenge is that it talks about one of the lines in there is to end anti-Christian bias, and that's and so I mean not anti-faith bias or faith or non-faith bias, but just anti-Christian. And I'm thinking, is that everybody asks me as a Muslim and as an advocate for religious freedom who's been involved in government, they say, well, what do you think about that? I go, I said, you want to know what? I'm not worried about it. And they said, why? I go, it's the problem is that other Christian groups are going to start to weigh in on this because that's the people who wrote that, they don't mean they're Christians.
Mm-hmm.
So because and so that's what in the Constitution, the idea of religious freedom, so Christian on Christian violence and bigotry and everything else wouldn't occur. Like that's it's like you were talking about your section of town. All these churches are, you're going to the coffee shop and everybody's opening up churches, but that's because everybody's disagreeing with each other and they just pop and open their own church, which is a different.
Right.
And so the challenge is that Christians, the Christian community will have to convene in an ecumenical fashion. That's for you, that term. I pull that out, and they'll have to really kind of have an ecumenical sort of conversation about what the intent is behind all of this, because you can't have one sect, of Christian nationalists or prosperity gospel or whatever calling the shots, because then what happens to the Church of the East or the Coptics or the Methodists, right. Or and so that
they would say that we're not real Christians anyway. I mean, the comments that I get when people find out I'm an Episcopalian and work towards inclusivity, but it's I think a lot of my white evangelical colleagues just they just want to be persecuted, so they carry this persecution chip around their shoulders, and it's like part of the reason why they have this anti-bias or anti-Christian thing is because they genuinely believe that Christians are persecuted, but their persecution is, oh, Starburst can't say Merry Christmas during Christmas season. I feel so persecuted. And it's like, you guys, there are literal people dying in China for being a Christian. Like, why do you want to be persecuted so bad? Like,
well,
we have the most control. Like, we have so much power and influence in this country. We are the least persecuted religious group in this country, but
every
the persecution complex is so much.
Look, every president's been Christian. Like they're like, we're so
Exactly.
excited to bring
Well,
Christianity back to the White House.
Trump.
Well, isn't Trump like a Herodian type of monarch? Like he's bringing about the change, like he might be flawed, but so in any event, the challenge is that Christian, every president's been Christian or culturally Christian.
Culturally Christian. There we go.
And there's that, and we live in a majority Christian country, so it's very funny. But when you have a tradition of martyrdom, you got to figure out how you're being martyred to be close to God. And I always say to my co-hosts and my evangelical friends when we're meeting, and I was like, "This counts," and they're like, "What do you mean?" I go, "This counts." I go, "Look, you're you're martyring yourself by just interacting with me and putting up with all of this, so you're like, this is like it's happening right now." So that's my gift to you in this podcast. And so, but I wanted to say thank you. I really do appreciate you taking the time. It means a lot for you to share and talk. And like you said, you're welcome to come back on and talk about. I think I'd be really interested in thinking about the Episcopalian interpretation of dignity, and how you put faith in action with inclusivity, because it's treacherous and it can be dangerous. And I think that might be a really good ask to bring you back, because I know you have an online component to that, which has like cyberbullying and all kinds of other hazing and trolling. But on the other side of it is there's a practicality in it, and in the you have a church in a strip mall, and you're gearing up towards this new area. This is like having your own place of worship. But I know there's a lot of people that are interested in that. Like I had a question. They go, well, how does a church become consecrated? And I was like, well, it's different for different faiths. I was like, but I'll ask. Yeah,
well, for us, I'll
ask
ask it really quickly. Once we there's also stages that we have. Like a church plant starts as a missional community, and then we become a fellowship, and then we become a mission, and then we become a parish. So there's graduating benchmarks that and then when we have a building, we'll call the bishop over. We have 4 bishops in our diocese, 5 now. We have 5 bishops in our diocese. One of the bishops would come over, and there's a whole consecration liturgy. They'll take their big staff, make crosses on the doors, and we say the prayers, and we'll go around and bless the whole thing. So there is a liturgy to everything that there is to communal life, I believe, as an Episcopalian.
Well, it makes sense. It makes sense, and I think, and like I said, we get a lot of questions about these sort of nuances, and then I'm like, okay, I've got to find, an Antiochian priest. How am I going to find it? Where am I going to get that guy? But I do appreciate you taking the time, and it means a lot for us to keep that dialogue open. I mean, the idea of you describing the different sectional elements of the Methodist and Anglican and Episcopalian churches, and then the challenges with you starting a church and your online presence, and then some of these things is really, and the practicality of it. The reality is goes back to our conversation about what comforts you and the community you belong in. I mean, you have a family, and you got to figure out how you can take what's best for your family. And you're talking about opening up the next chapter moving from the Methodist to the Episcopalian, and it made sense. But you're clearly doing good work. You're clearly engaging. You're clearly growing. So there's an appeal.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's all fantastic. There's, you're providing a multi-use space for your community, and a destination, sort of safe haven for the other. And I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. I'm just saying that, if you don't know where to go, you can come to this.
Give us a try.
Yeah. So, the bakery, what a great name for a church. So people come in and looking for baked goods, and you're like, we bake love and salvation. So that shelf looks empty, but it's actually full. I think I could be an evangelical priest. I'd be honest.
I think you could. You're not that far away.
Yeah, so if you want, you can make a donation, and the change is salvation. So but I don't know how any of that works, but I feel like that's how I could have a pretty decent following. And
you're not far off. You got the language down.
So,
and you already asked for money. That's the big thing.
That's the big thing. So so I'm just But in any event, I appreciate you taking the time. Like I said, it means a lot. Thank you so much.
And thank you for having me. It was really great.